So how many people, I can't move around, this is going to drive me crazy. How many people recognize this site? Awesome, awesome, awesome. So this site was, I don't know, late 90s maybe is when it first came out. And it was the first site that really showcased the power of CSS and what you could do with it. You could have one HTML structure and just change the style sheet, and you could change the entire theme of the site, change the design completely. You can do whatever you want. It really showcased how easy it was to do that. But the problem is, this site also built a lot of bad habits that we started following. So like, everyone's like, oh yeah, just build your HTML once, and you're good. You just kind of, just make a style change here and there, and so you never have to worry about writing the HTML ever again. Well, I did that too. I was like, oh yeah, you're right, let's just do that. And like the first time you build it, yeah, it's awesome. Oh, I need this. Well, I'll just style this. Oh wait, no, I'm cascading out like 5 different selectors and having like all sorts of like LIAP, whatever. I'm going way too deep. So essentially, like I started like CSS Zen also crippled us. It started tightly coupling the HTML and your styles. So you started like being like really structured to this right here, and it just like it ruined it. So this is kind of like how I've guided my career, and just my current workflow is constant evaluation and self-loathing. So essentially, this is what drove me to write this presentation. I would do something, I'm like, oh yeah, this is awesome. Oh, 1 week later, yeah, that's absolute garbage. What was I thinking? I'm such an idiot. And so, but it helped me constantly change my workflow, make sure I'm just, doing the right things, constantly evaluating and improving on my practices. So, I was building a site for a large travel site, and it had like a lot of theming and stuff. So like I started out, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is gonna be awesome. Starting from scratch is gonna be the best project ever, and it just slowly but surely just deteriorated, because I would just build like this template and then that template and that template, and it fell apart. And that's what led me to the first problem: is specificity kills. This is like the #1 thing that ruins every developer's day, is constantly fighting with the numbers. And that's essentially what specificity is a numbers game. Specificity is also hard to pronounce, and I've been good so far. So how many people have seen this slide? Okay, so this is CSS specificity. So it uses fish to give an example of how specificity works in CSS. So the universal is 0. It's everything. An element is worth 1. That's 2 elements. Classes are worth 1 point in the middle. Same with attribute selectors. ID is worth 1 on the end, and then you have the nuclear importance. So this is a great guide. If you're not totally comfortable with CSS specificity, I definitely recommend taking a look at this. It will really help guide you. Like I said, it's always a numbers game with this. So I read a blog post a year or so ago by Harry Roberts, and he said, he made the statement, carpet bombing your elements. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's a great statement. He's like essentially just don't like make blanket statements on stuff. So you see this, nobody's going to do that. You're not going to make global definitions for your div, because you're going to be constantly overriding that. So why is that okay? I see this everywhere now with all the new HTML5 header, awesome, boom, right there. That's no different than this. If you deal with like WordPress blogs or any kind of themes like that, if they actually follow the spec correctly, they could use header anywhere. And that's in like, you don't always have complete control over the site and what's going to be built in the content. So you have to be mindful of stuff like that. So better solutions, header ID, header class. I'm not saying this is the greatest, but it's a step above doing that. So I was just saying that your header is an immediate child of the body. Not the greatest, but it's much better than just blanket stating your header. So, okay, well, let's just be a little more specific on stuff. Okay, so I have header UL. I mean, a lot of people would probably guess what that most likely is, but in actuality, it could be a couple different things. What about sidebar div? I guess it's a widget, or it could be a part of a list, or it could be just about anything. So you're playing a guessing game. What is this? And then we have this, content P. Chances are you're going to be writing a class to override that right there. And you're going to write another class to override that. And it's going to go on and on and on. So CSS is easy. Naming stuff is hard. That's the hardest part about CSS is naming. So let's play a little game. We have guess that element. So we're going back to the examples from before. Sidebar div. How about something like promo box? If I tell you, if I have a class of promo box, you clearly know what I'm styling right there. With sidebar div, you're left to guess. You're playing the guessing game until you actually see it in implementation. Header UL. The most obvious would be nav main. But by using nav main, I have clearly defined what I'm doing here. You're seeing a pattern. H2 span. Tagline. Just making basic steps like this and being very specific with what you're doing will make it easier for you or the developer that follows you in understanding what's going on. Clear intent. Clear intent is the goal, and that's what that is pointing to. You know, you shouldn't have to play the 20 questions game of what is this declaration and what is it doing. Be intentful in what you're styling. Say exactly what you're doing. You know, like I said, I'm not saying every element on a page should have classes, but don't be afraid of classitis or class soup. It's there to help you. And do not overqualify your declarations. I see this all the time, and I have an idea of why people do this. It's, one, a bad idea because it's going to ruin your specificity, and also it's strangling your developer. So look at this. So I right here, I've already upped my CSS specificity, and I'm going to have to use some other stuff to override that. That's not fun. And what if I need to use an OL for the nav primary? Well, I can't do that anymore. I'm dictating. You're going to use a UL because I said so. What about div, header? What if I want to use header or section or something like that? Once again, I'm dictating what you're going to use. I'm in charge here. I'm running this style, and you know what? Your HTML is going to do what I say. And that's not the case. That's not the way it should be. Your HTML defines the structure. Your CSS defines the style. So do not let your CSS dictate your HTML structure. They complement each other. They are not, you know, they shouldn't be tightly coupled. Yay, freedom. We released it. The specificity is back down to where it should be, and I can use that on any element I need to. No more strangling developers. So when I say let's make specificity easy, so by sticking to a single type, so I prefer using classes for everything. I don't really use IDs, and I'll get into that a little more later on. But by using classes, I know exactly the power, the strength, like the 0, 1, 0. That's what a class is going to be worth. If I stick to a simple, just styles like that, I'm not going to have any specificity about it where I'm constantly number game in my head. Well, that will override. No, I know exactly what I'm competing with. And if you bring it down to single level CSS styles, maybe someone's heard of the BEM. It's a way to do block element modifier, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it brings it down to one style. So you easily know what's going to be applied there. You're not having to constantly guess, is this going to override this, override that? So my rule is avoid IDs. I use IDs for JavaScript hooks, and that's it. I have a little asterisk there, which may be hard to see from there, but I have the asterisk there because I think you can use IDs, and I have my one rule. If you use IDs, just like on a page, an ID can only be used once. That's the way it should be done in your CSS. You define it, and then you never reference it again. So if you're going to use an ID like that, I'm perfectly fine with it because you're not going to destroy your specificity by referencing it somewhere else. So modular development. How many people have heard of modular development, SMAX, OOCSS? Yeah, a few. Who likes raising their hands in presentations? Okay. So the key is to stop developing pages and start developing systems. So back to my example of when I was working on a giant travel site, like how most people receive stuff. I was given a PSD, I chopped it up, it was perfection. Okay, what about the next one? And the next one? Well, yeah, it's perfect in that one-page scenario. So what if I had just broken it out and really thought about the components and the small pieces? That would have made it much easier and much more scalable. So just kind of a brief history of what OOCSS is. So Nicole Sullivan deemed the term, I don't know how many years ago, but she gave a great example of how it can be utilized. And she showcased Facebook, and she talked about what was called the media object. Essentially, it's media, content on the right, or you can just have the reverse, content on the left, media on the right. And now, if you look at your page, and you look at something, you really just think of it as media content, how much of your page could just be broken out into a media object? A lot of it. Facebook, I mean, like in a media, it could be an icon. It could be a movie. It could be an image. It could be whatever. And then you have content. So literally, it could be reused everywhere. So that was really great. And like a lot of people like struggled with the whole CSS. People kind of like, CSS isn't object-oriented. What are you talking about? And that's not what she was saying. She was saying you have inheritance with the cascade and everything like that. And like if you follow a lot of the methodologies used in object-oriented CSS or object-oriented programming, you build up single responsibility principles and stuff like that, where one thing should have one responsibility and it should do it well. And that's it. Instead of like covering a bunch of things. So this right here is actually an example of the media object. It's written in should be Sass. Yeah, it's Sass. So this is from Inuit CSS, which is a framework library, I guess you would call it, from Harry Roberts. And it was just his example of the media object and what you could use. And it's just very basic, very simple. So the two groups I see out there a lot are, like I said, Inuit CSS and SMAX. So SMAX is more of a guideline and kind of a naming convention how to organize your code. It makes it very simple, but there is no framework behind it. You just build it based off of the concepts he talks about. Inuit CSS is more so, hey, I took it a step further and I built some of these modules for you. Some really reusable things that you can go ahead and just use these wherever you want. And Inuit uses the block element modifier, which is just a way to just write a single style that describes them. So like you could have like your navigation could be a block, and each LI could be an item, and then a modifier would be like if I'm changing the theme, or I'm changing the order, or I'm changing the constraints of the width of something. So it's just a way of writing stuff. Like this talk doesn't really cover BEM much further than that, but it's definitely interesting and very odd to see when you start trying it, but it's starting to grow on me. I've been about a year messing with it, I'll give it a try, whatnot, and it's coming around. So as I was saying before, let's separate the structure from the style. So how many people use Bootstrap? All right, lots of people like raising their hands. All right, so this is what a base object would be, a button. So we have our BTN. Now, if you notice, like I don't touch any of the actual colors or stylings or anything like that. I'm bringing it to a generic button. That's it. So right here is just me outputting an input, an href, and a button. And this is what they would look like if I just applied the button class. So now let's actually create some submodules. So I have these button sizes. So I have BTN small, medium, large, extra large, etc. And you notice that it has one job. It's just the sizing. That's all it cares about. That's all it needs to do. It doesn't need to worry about anything else. Then I have my BTN primary. And primary's sole purpose is just for stylizing those buttons, changing the style. So if I go ahead and have BTN, and then I add the BTN large class there, they all increase the size consistently across all of those elements. Now I applied the style class to go along with it. So right there I have my base BTN, my sizing submodule, and my BTN primary, which is my styling module. And now, it doesn't matter what element I apply it to, it's going to look the same, and I don't have any other concerns. So right there, I have a base module, and then I have submodules to have those single responsibilities. They have one task, and they need to do that task well. They don't need to worry about anything else. So I got this design right here from, what is that site called? ThemeForest, because the link's right there. Awesome. And I was like, okay, so let's go back to old me. What would I do? I would get this page. Someone talks like, hey, let's knock this out. So I'll be like, okay, featured posts, recent posts, active members, etc. But what if I wanted to, try to incorporate the media object a little bit? Remember, image on the left, content on the right, or video or icon on the left, whatever. So right here, I went ahead and created some media object, and I have a little grid here for if I'm doing a grid for the layout. Then I have my media list, and then I have a submodule of media featured list because I'm changing the width, and that's only specifically for that. So that submodule has one job, and it's for the width. Oh, so one thing else I do that some people may do, or really doesn't matter, I use a media item and the LI. Once again, if you want to go one way and you know you're going to do it that way, that's fine. I did it here just so I could damn it, there we go. Just so like if I had just a bunch of divs, it could be outputted. Or if I just had the LI right there, I could do it. I'm not letting my CSS tell my HTML how it should be. So it doesn't care. I have my media item. I could apply it to anything and it would work just fine. So it doesn't have to be an LI. It could be a div, be a section, whatever. I'm not dictating what this HTML structure should be. So I have my layout grid. So this right here is a layout element, and its one job is to dictate what the layout should be. I have my media object from the previous example and a media list. Submodule is the media featured list. So we'll go back to that example. That right there could be an L-grid media list. There's that media, there's the content below it. This could be a media list. That could be a grid media list. So the media list is now being used for all three of those scenarios. And truthfully, look right there. It could be right there also. Image, content. So this is what I cut out just on my own, just real quickly, was to do. And that's utilizing all those methods right there. So this is using a grid, that's using a grid, and that's not using a grid layout. And I use that same media list class for all those right there. And it's just being reused. So one of the keys to modular development is context must not be modified. So, or context must not modify your modules. So if I have one of these modules and I put it in the header, I put it in the footer, I put it in the sidebar, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter where I put it, it should always act the same. So essentially, like, that's where a lot of people get into trouble. So like, you know what an H2 should look like, but when people start saying sidebar H2 or footer H2, now I'm letting the context define what an H2 looks like instead of being more intentful and saying that this was a specific type of header. So don't let the context define your module itself. So one of the big things that I find very lacking in the front-end development community is code standards and styles. Formatting. So right here is just a base example of some CSS. I prefer hyphen-separated classes names. Once again, a lot of these things I say are of my opinion, but what I want you to strive for is consistency. Like, if I look at your code base, it shouldn't look like 17 developers worked on this code base. It should look like one developer worked on it. So if you have a code standard, you can follow something like this. Space between the property and the value. Inline only allowed when there's only one property. One selector per line. 2 space versus 4 space versus tabs. Once again, everyone will argue, my way is better. Camel case is better. Tabs is way better than 4 space or 2 space. I really don't care. That's the thing. These are just my opinions. The fact is, I would much rather you be consistent than to have a war about which one should be followed. If I go into a legacy code base, you know what I do? I don't code like the way I would. I see how they're writing it. Even if I disagree, I'm going to follow that same way, because that's how somebody comes in after me. They're going to be expecting that exact same type of format. So declaration order. So I used to be a big person like, I'm going to alphabetize everything, and it's going to be awesome. But you know what? Like, having height like way in the middle and width way at the bottom, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to need an exception, so I'm going to put those two next. Why not organize it in a more, realistic way? So kind of the way I follow is the positioning right here, all at the top. Any kind of display and box model to follow. Any kind of typographical styling, colors, etc. And then if you're using a preprocessor, I always put them at the bottom. You put them at the top, you can do whatever. Once again, we're going back to consistency. That's what really matters. So documentation. So there's been more and more people using, what's it called, KSS, which is kind of like a style guide generator based off of the comments in your CSS. This is just kind of like my example of how I've been writing it. I have a background in PHP. So like PHP doc blocks are, heavily used for documenting stuff. So I kind of follow a similar format. But right here, I define my primary site navigation. That's just, what this is. And then I have these tags. And so I put the carets there because once again, Harry Roberts had a great point. He's like, carets are like never used in CSS. So it'd be, if you're grepping something in the command line, you can easily find all those tags where you're in your CSS where you have applied this. And then I can have an extends the nav. So nav main is an extension of nav. Nav is your primary object or module, So once again, just trying, I've said it 20 times. I'm going to keep hammering it in. Predictability and consistency always wins out. Always, always, always. And I could easily rewrite that to be readability and maintainability. Because if I know what to expect, chances are I'm going to be able to maintain this code a lot longer, and it's going to be easy to follow and easy to read. So a lot of the stuff I've talked about with the order and some of the and how I do my code standards is from Nicholas Geller. I probably destroyed his name. But he has a great style guide that he's written up on GitHub, Idiomatic CSS. And just so happens me and him agree on the majority of things, so I follow this guideline. There's also the WordPress. They actually have a CSS coding standard. And it's actually pretty good. And all I'm saying is you need to have something. When you're onboarding new developers and everything, being consistent is the key here. And so having something documenting what you guys have and what you're going to do is really important. So organization and structure. So everybody gets that fresh, that green project, and they're like, okay, you know what? This time, it's not going to be like that legacy junk I've been working with before. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to have all these folders. It's going to be super organized. It's going to be the best project ever. People's minds are going to be blown. Okay, so you get it done. You're like, wow, that's awesome. Okay, well, an update comes in. Oh, well, that sort of fits. Well, it's kind of a one-off, so I'll just, add a folder here and organize it all there. And then another update comes. Okay, well, it sort of works. And in the end, it's going to abstract itself out. Abstraction in modularity is great until it's not. So essentially, if it takes you more than 5 seconds to figure out where to put something, you've gone too far. You've done it too much. So try to keep a simple I wouldn't go much more than maybe a couple folders deep in your organization, because when a new developer comes in, they're like, well, I have this style and I think it belongs here, but it might go there, maybe. Too confusing. More than 5 seconds, too far. So, as I talked about with code standards and everything, how many people have seen CSS lint? Awesome. So, I love this. CSS lint will hurt your feelings. Pretty much you're going to paste in your code here, you're going to hit lint, and it's going to tell you, hey, you know what, you did this wrong, and that wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong. CSS lint is a bit opinionated. And I don't agree with every rule. If you could actually scroll down, you could see that there's actually ways to turn things on and off. But it's an easy way for you to like have code like that your team built and actually have it run against the linter. So CSS lint, there's also a grunt tool. You can like run it on the command line through Node, Rhino, whatever, a bunch of those, and you could actually like help automate these lint tests on your CSS to make sure people are kind of following the great advice that the CSS lint provides. Also, there is this right here. It's the HTML code sniffer. Now, not everybody is into PHP, but PHP is installed pretty much everywhere. So right here, they have what's called the PHP code sniffer. They have a great section in CSS where you can actually run the code sniffer over your CSS and have all your custom rules, and it will output and say, hey, you know, you broke this rule, and that rule. And you could actually have this tied to your version control, like Git or SVN or whatever. And it could actually deny the commit and say, hey, you know what, you didn't follow code standard, so fix your code, and then you can commit. You could hook it up to Jenkins, whatever. It would be super helpful. So just kind of closing on everything, just some key points. So naming is hard, so be clear with your styles. I love this quote by Harry Robertson, you know, you're not supposed to read your slides, but I don't care, I'm going to read it anyways. In general, instead of carpet bombing your elements, shoot to kill. Target them specifically and explicitly. Make sure your selector intent is accurate and targeted. So once again, just hammering home that point, don't make me play the guessing game. Be very specific with what you're trying to style and do. Don't let your styles define your HTML structure. You know, your styles should do just that and just style your HTML. Your HTML is supposed to be semantic for the web browser, for the crawlers. It's your HTML is your table of contents for your website. Your HTML or your CSS is just the styling to go with it. And don't let your context change your module. When you're writing modules and stuff, you need to think inside the box. Your module does not care about anything outside of it. It only cares about what's inside the box. So external constraints don't matter. It's everything that's inside. That's all you're concerned with. And right here, this is from Andy Hume. This is why people go on about readability, clarity, simplicity, and explicitness, because they are fundamentally characteristic of maintainable code bases. Andy Hume has said himself he would rather it be consistent than right, because if it's at least consistent, he knows he can easily find where to fix it. And document your code. So documenting for tomorrow's developer, because that could very well be you 6 months, 2 years down the line. And I promise you, you're not going to remember everything about that site. So we have any questions, concerns, complaints? So KSS you follow their structure, which is similar but not exactly the way I was doing it. And what it'll do is you run it through the KSS, which I think it's the Node. There's two versions. There's the Ruby one, and then there's the Node one. You want to go with the Node one. And what it'll do is it will actually like take those styles, output a navigation, the element itself, and the CSS that goes along with it. So it actually creates a style guide that like you can use for references and stuff. Like it'd be really helpful for like, you know, let's say you have a separation of a front-end team and a back-end team. If your front-end team just, you know, runs it through KSS, it's going to output a style guide, so a back-end developer can just look at it and be like, oh, okay, I know what I need to output in this code right here. So it actually outputs an HTML page with navigation of all the elements that you have documented. So a better way to organize your code when you're doing like an asset handoff. So once again, going back to the preprocessors, like you can definitely, I would categorize all your colors, like, and I wouldn't like name them based off just, I mean, you could have primary color, secondary color, or something like that. I prefer not to name variables just on color. Sometimes it's helpful, but like if it's going to be the primary theme of your site or the secondary color, I usually like to name the variables like that. Like I said, if you just start with a base button class that only pretty much resets it back to its default, and then you use a separate submodule for actually used for sizing, and the rest of your colors and any other kind of styling is used there. I think that would be really helpful. But it's always a team collaboration, and like when it comes to naming your styles, it shouldn't be one developer off on their own, making all the decisions. It should be a team collaboration, so everyone agrees on what that style is saying. Because there's plenty of times I look at a section and I'm like, this could be this, could be that. Let me talk with the art director, kind of see where they were thinking that actually was. And so collaboration is definitely the best way to generate the most understandable style names. I hope that helps. Yeah. Well, the thing is, class names don't need to be semantic. That's the job of your HTML. Class names need to make sense to the developer. The browser doesn't care what your styles are named. It's only there to help your developer, and so it doesn't really make a difference when it comes to semantic CSS naming. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much.